I grew up with pastors that preached the gospel. But after September the 11th, the gospel's no longer central. It's more and more pushed off to the side. Instead of the Apostle Paul, I am not ashamed of the gospel, is I am ashamed of the gospel. What are we going to do with this hot potato? Where are we going to push it? What we'll do is we'll fill up the annual agenda with so many things that the congregation won't know when they're not preaching the gospel anymore. We'll just get so busy. This was the fruit. This was the fruit. The decentralization of the gospel, and ultimately pastors becoming ashamed. I used to knock around with 6 pastors. We would meet every month, and we would meet for a long time. It wasn't a short time. We'd meet for 3 or 4 hours. We got on really well, but we decided once that we would explore what is the gospel. I kid you not. We went for one another's throats. There was such disagreement on what the gospel was. Because you see, both in the Old Testament and the New Testament, it's very clear that our God exclusively says, I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. That's it. That's Old Testament. New Testament says this, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. What do we do with these hot potatoes when inclusivism becomes the thing? Because of September the 11th. We don't let the congregation know. You don't let the congregation know that you're pushing this thing out. You keep the congregation busy. And that's what's happened. That's the fruit. And then there's the 2008 crash. 2008 crash, greedy bankers, greedy independent bankers giving out loans to people that haven't got the hope in paying off those loans. And of course, there's a crash. What is the fruit? The fruit's very simple. You can't trust independent bankers. Re-centralize banking. Bring in programmable currency and bring in a social credit system. This is the fruit. You can't trust them. Let's re-centralize it. It's the fruit. And of course, we're beginning to see that fruit now. But the big one is COVID. So the millennials had a triple whammy. The biggest was COVID. Massive. Changed the way that we think. Massively. The fruit of COVID. Jacob talks a lot about tribulation. Flips this. One of the ways of describing tribulation is that tribulation is pressure. That's right, pressure. So if tribulation is pressure, then great tribulation is pressure on another level. What the millennials saw or experienced is something none of us have ever experienced. And of course, it wasn't just the millennials, but they were the most impressionable at that time. The millennials were, COVID-19, were either just going into university or just finishing. They were just beginning to live. You talk to millennials about COVID. They just wanted to live. They wanted their lives back. So when you're at that age and you want to live, you're not saved. You don't understand Jesus or the gospel. You want to live. And so they jumped at the pressure to comply. Because whatever it takes to get our lives back, we want our lives back. Those are the millennials. Unfortunately, you know this is true. There was an awful lot of baby boomers like that too. In many ways, I dreaded going back to church because there were so many people that were having their own personal revival in lockdown. I dreaded going back because of all the self-preservation that was going on. What are we going back to? Tram lines on the floor? You can't sing? You're not allowed to breathe on somebody? Everybody looking at everybody like big brother? I accuse one of our people as being a milk monitor. Does anybody know what a milk monitor is? The one that gives out the milk to everybody else at primary school? These milk monitors. Monitoring everything. Self-preservation. We're there to worship God. That went out the window. Everybody's looking at everybody. There was a pressure to comply. A pressure to comply. A pressure to comply to some ridiculous laws. One of them was, so I'd often nip away to the Lake District in lockdown. I'd nip off to the lakes and I'd go up in the hills. If they caught you in the hills, they would fine you. They would fine you for being in the middle of nowhere. That's the pressure to comply. To ridiculous, but there's something going on here, right? There's something, the pressure to comply to ridiculous laws. Well, I want my life back, so I don't care. Tell me what it is, I'll comply. Now, there's something here. Going back to the little boy, the bomb that went off over Hiroshima. In order to create a nuclear bomb, you have to get together an awful lot of radioactive material. You have to get together a heavy metal that is incredibly unstable. Just to enrich that uranium was a very, very, very slow process, as you know. It was an achievement just to get. They ended up with about 64 kilograms of highly enriched uranium. It was very unstable. The world right now is very, very unstable. Jesus upholds all things by the power of his word. But you take away the word and things start to happen, right? So, with a conventional nuclear bomb, in the center of the center of the center of the bomb, you have a sphere of a heavy metal that is highly unstable. But that perfect sphere has to go from critical mass to supercritical mass. Now, this is the thing. In order for that to happen, that sphere has to have uniform pressure from every direction at exactly the same time. And in a nuclear bomb, in a billionth of a second, that sphere would have to become 2.5 times more dense. In other words, it would be crushed in every direction simultaneously to something half the size. How they did that without computers, how they did that without microchips is unbelievable. So they surrounded this uranium with detonators, perfectly positioned, almost like bricks on the wall where you get one layer and then the other layer is staggered on that layer and then there's another layer staggered on that layer, because when they detonated that thing, unless that sphere crushed into a perfect sphere, not something that's out of shape but a perfect sphere, you're not going to end up with nuclear fission. You're not going to end up with a proper reaction. You're not going to go into supercritical mass. So inside of that bomb, as it's coming down on the parachute, that thing, there's detonators all around it that have to go off perfectly. And they're all around it in every angle. And they have to go off together. And they go off in such a way that all around this sphere, the pressure is pushed in perfectly in every direction, crushing this thing to half of its size. Do you understand what I'm saying? That's Revelation 13. You see, friends, at the moment, we've tasted pressure. At the end of time, there's going to be pressure on a level we've never seen before. This planet is going from critical mass to supercritical mass. It's going from tribulation to great tribulation. It's going from pressure to mega pressure from every direction. What the millennials tasted was the first time that the free world had ever really been pressured into doing something that makes absolutely no sense. Real pressure. And because they want their life back, they said, what do you want us to do? We'll do it. Now, in a billionth of a second, that uranium is crushed to half of its size and it goes to something called supercritical mass. All you've got to do then is fire one neutron into the middle of that, just one neutron, and all hell breaks loose. Do you understand what I'm talking about, right? We are being prepared for the Antichrist. And the world has to go from critical mass to supercritical mass. We go from tribulation to great tribulation. There comes a point where one man will change the world forever. Well, thank God, 2,000 years ago, one man did change the world forever. And, it ain't over until the Lord returns. Let's just put it like that. Can everybody see here that what happened to to everybody, but the millennials are the next generation that are really going to be in control of this planet. And they really get inclusivism like we don't. And they get compliance like we don't. And they're ready. They're ready for the next step. Okay, folks, let's move to Generation Z. Anybody ever heard of Generation Zers? Crazy bunch. Absolutely crazy bunch. They call themselves the unlimited generation. Unboundless generation. Have a look at Judges. The book of Judges, chapter 21, verse 25. Judges 21:25. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everybody did what was right in his own eyes. That pretty well summarizes Generation Z. So we have three eras. We have pre-modern era, and the pre-modern era from the 1500s to the 1800s basically taught that God is truth. Then you have the modern era, 1800s to around about 1980s, that teaches that science is truth. Now, of course, we're in the postmodern era, Generation Z, which teaches that everything is truth, nothing is truth, what I feel is truth, what I say is truth, truth is subjective, I identify as half human, half animal. It's people's opinions. People's opinions. I want to talk about social media, because social media has shaped us, friends, in a way that we I don't think many of us are really getting. And although it can certainly be used for good, it is being used for a great evil. So, many of you have heard of a guy called Joseph Goebbels, right? Joseph Goebbels, Hitler would never have gotten away with what he did without Goebbels. Goebbels was the one. He was the propaganda machine. He understood how to manipulate the media like nobody else. He's the one that made Kristallnacht possible. What that man would have done with social media, right? What he would have done with that platform. The trouble is, we have got Joseph Goebbels around in the world today. We're just not aware of it. And they know how to use social media. So, social media. In the 1960s to 2020s, the speed of a car has doubled. From the 1960s to the 2020s, the speed of a computer is 1 trillion times faster. The speed of a car has doubled, the speed of a computer is 1 trillion times faster. In 1969, there was something called the ARPANET. This was the genesis of the internet, October the 29th, 1969. The very first message was sent from Stanford to UCLA computer, 350 miles. A message was sent. I mean, back then, this was unbelievable. And they sent this message, and the message was log. L. Have you got the L? We've got the L. O. Have you got the O? Yes, we've got the O. G. Have you got the G? No, it's crashed. And it crashed on the G. So they say that the internet began with the words "and low." Never mind. So this was the beginning. It crashed on low. This was the birth of the internet. 1971, you had the first email. 1973, you got the first transatlantic connection. 1977, you got the first modern PC. 1988, you've got real-time chat. 1989, you've got AOL. Who remembers AOL? America Online. 1989, you've got www. You remember that? 1990, you got the first search engines and photos were shared. You remember when you bought a computer that could actually print decent graphics and real-life photos? 1991, MP3s. I remember vinyl records. I still got vinyl records. I remember vinyl records. I loved vinyl records. I still love them because you've got to take your time. Now, my son, I say, Joe, why don't you just listen to a vinyl? No, he says, Dad, people don't listen to songs all the way through anymore. You listen to about 20 seconds of the song and you scroll on. He says, I've got 30,000 songs on this. And so we got this, the first photos, MP3s, webcams, 1994. First transaction, imagine that. I mean, my mum and dad still today will not use the computer to make financial transactions, no way. 1995, you got the birth of eBay and Amazon, and you've got, then Wi-Fi was a biggie, wasn't it? It was a really biggie. And then you've got Wikipedia. Wikipedia was huge. 2004, this is when it gets really interesting. 2004, you got Facebook. You got 2005, you got YouTube. 2006, you got Twitter. What Joseph Goebbels would have done with those? With Facebook, with YouTube, with Twitter. 2009, you got TV shows online. You got something called the iPhone that brought together 3 different devices. It was unreal. Can you remember? It was so exciting. You don't look that excited. So then, you, of course, you end up, 2008, you end up with Bitcoin. 2009, you've got WhatsApp. 2010, you've got Instagram. 2011, you've got Zoom. Zoom. Listen, by the time you get to the entire world being put into lockdown, all of these platforms are working to the T. Every single one of them. Talk about for such a time as this, eh? All of those platforms were working to the T. Social media is the greatest propaganda machine in the history of the world. And we're just not getting it. We're not getting how powerful it is. Social media is a weapon in the hands of the wrong people. It is a very lethal weapon. Have a look at Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 16. Proverbs chapter 16, verse 2. All the ways of a man are clean in his own sight. That's Generation Zers, that's what they believe. All the ways of a man, they're clean in their own sight. However, this is the thing. The Lord weighs. Please remember that because we're going to come to this. This is really important at the end of this message. The Lord weighs the motives. The Lord measures us. He weighs us. He observes us. So our ways are clean in our sight, but there is a God that created the heavens and the earth, that holds the universe together by the power of His word, and He weighs us. Social media. Now, this is important. Please don't start switching off. Social media is an echo chamber. Social media will echo back to you whatever it is that you are. That's how it works. That's why you can't understand why people don't see what's going on in Palestine the way you do. What's going on in Israel. Who's guilty? Because social media will only echo back what you already believe. It's an echo chamber. It's more than that, but initially it's an echo chamber. So, social media will reaffirm your political persuasion. Do you understand? Well, imagine buying a newspaper back in the day. You read it, you open your newspaper and there's lots of articles in the newspaper, but one catches your eye that you find particularly interesting. And as you start to read that one article that is particularly interesting, the entire paper changes before your eyes, and the article is now filled with 40, 50 articles that reaffirm the article that caught your eye. That's social media. It is an echo chamber. It reaffirms what you already are. It reaffirms your habits. It reaffirms your fashion if you're into fashion. It reaffirms the food that you like. If you're a northerner, you'll watch things like Rate My Takeaway. It will reaffirm your conspiracies if you're into that kind of thing. It will reaffirm your gambling tendencies. It will echo back to you the kind of porn that you like. It's an echo chamber, and it will start to suggest things to you. If you're a tree hugger, it will reaffirm to you the whole world is full of tree huggers. If you're an eco-warrior, it will reaffirm to you that that's exactly what you need to be. You need to be an eco-warrior. It will echo back to you what you are. It will always reaffirm. When it comes to wokeism, this echo chamber goes to another level. And we're not getting this. Adults, parents, they're just not getting what their kids are doing, what these things are. So if you're into wokeism, if you're into the whole LGBTQ thing, if you're agender, bigender, cisgender, gender fluid, gender queer, gender variant, third gender, transgender, two-spirit or non-binary, and we'll come back to non-binary, that's a big one, it will reaffirm what you are. So social media, this is what it's done. This is important. Social media has reaffirmed to many Gen Zers and millennials actually, and even some baby boomers, it reaffirms their wokeness. It reaffirms their political persuasion. Then it makes a calculated guess to your religious bias. Because it doesn't just reaffirm what you are, it starts to make suggestions of other things you might be into. So somebody that is kind of into the woke thing and kind of leans towards the left, they're going to find things popping up on the internet that are very pro-Palestinian. Pro-Palestinian rallies and stuff like that. And if they click on enough of those, the next thing that they're going to start getting up is anti-Semitic propaganda. And then they're going to start getting up things about the real truth behind October the 7th and the Palestinian conflict. Now, this is really important. People carry these all the time. They live on them. And so what happens is, when something big happens, and what's happened is really big, the echo chamber goes into critical mass. It goes into supercritical mass. And it goes from you like wokeness to your political persuasion to suggestions on all of this. So here's the thing. People are asking the question, how on earth have we got to this place so quickly within a month? How's the world become so anti-Semitic within a month? Where were these people before? It's social media. Social media echoes back what you are, but it doesn't just echo back what you are, it makes calculated guesses as to what you probably would like to hear. And it's coming up on the phone all the time. There's another video. What do you think about this one? The videos that you've seen, the footage that you've seen when they burst through the fences and they did what they did. Most people haven't seen any of that. When you talk about that, they've not seen that. When you try to say to them, do you understand The level of cruelty that's going on, no, they don't. Because they haven't seen any of it. Because social media is an echo chamber. This thing here, folks, right now, we have to use it for the good. We have to. And we are doing, thank God. And the Lord is blessing us. But this thing here is changing the way people think at a rate we've never seen before in our lives. So if you want to know how this thing has happened so quickly, it's because of this echo chamber. Does that make sense, folks? It's scary, isn't it? Have a look at Romans chapter 6 for a minute. There's a problem with, of course, with identifying there's all these different persuasions and calling things evil good and good evil. This is the problem. This is the problem. The problem is that the wages of sin is death. Romans 6:23. The wages of sin is death. It's a law. You can't get away from it. And so the ultimate fruit is death. It's always death. So since the explosion of social media, now, remember this came to maturity in around about 2010. We've had 10 years of conditioning before COVID. This is important. This is really important. You've got to get this. Since these social media platforms came in 2010, so the suicide rate has gone through the roof. So all of this, oh, you love these things. My truth is my truth. It's not helping. It's not helping because the wages of sin is death. So people want to kill themselves. The use of antidepressants has doubled. The LGBTQ community has the highest suicide rate of any community. Why? Because the wages of sin is death. That's what the Bible says. But this is what they say, because they're not going to, how can they admit to that? They can't, because then the whole thing is finished. So what they say is, no. The reason why we have the high suicide rate is because of persecution. Because we're persecuted, because of hate speech, and because of microaggression. And the same people that are offended by these small, microaggressive things, cheered at the downfall of the people on the other side of the fence. That they don't know the half of it, but they cheered the Palestinians. They cheered Hamas. But these are the people that say the reason why we kill ourselves is because of our persecution, hate speech, and microaggression. Well, the 10 most persecuted countries for Christians in North Korea, Afghanistan, Somalia, Libya, Pakistan, Eritrea, Yemen, Iran, Nigeria, Indonesia. And you've got to put Israel in there now. What's happening is unbelievable. The fastest growing church in the world is in Iran. And if you know anything about Iran, they're getting butchered. But it's the fastest growing church. So this idea that persecution always results in suicide, and microaggression results in suicide, and hate speech results in suicide, it's not true. Some of the places where there is real hate speech and real aggression, and people are being slaughtered, these places are growing. It's not true. It's not true what they're telling us. The truth is in the Word. And the Word says this: the wages of sin is death. That's why you want to take your life. Because that's what it does. 2011, self-harm amongst teenagers, From 2011, when these social media platforms became the thing, from 2011, self-harm amongst teenagers went up by 60%. Self-harm amongst girls from the age of 10 to 14 went up by 189%. Suicide rate amongst teenage girls, suicide rate from 15 to 19 went up by 70%. Suicide rate amongst the younger ones, the ones that are questioning life and questioning things. And, in my day, you could be a tomboy. My wife was a tomboy. She should tell you that. She was a tomboy. She wanted to play on rope swings and stuff. You could be a tomboy and still be feminine. And still actually like men, but you're a tomboy. But you can't do that anymore. So this impressionable age of the 10s to the 14s, when social media in 2011, suicide rate went up by 151%. Facial dysmorphia. Ooh, I don't look as pretty as the person looking at me. No, they've got a filter on, love. Seriously. Tristan Harris. If you're writing notes, just write this guy's name down. He was the product manager of Google. And there's a documentary on him on Netflix that you really need to watch. This man has woke up. Talking about woke. He's woke up. He has woke up to the damage of social media, right? So this is a man that's made millions off the back of these things. And this is what he says. And there are others that can see what this is doing to society. And right now, in this fight that we're in, the fight of our lives, how this is playing such a big part. This is what he says, Tristan Harris. If we don't agree what truth is, or that there is even such a thing as truth, listen to this, strange choice of words, we are toast. That's what he says. I think that's a very strange choice of words for somebody that's obviously highly intelligent. We're toast. We're going to become cinders. Social media is an echo chamber that does a quick calculation and thinks, well, if they're into this, they're probably going to like this too. And it's caused closet anti-Semites to come out of the woodwork all over the place. And it's given them the power. It's empowered them. 2 Thessalonians, truth has fallen in the streets, right? Truth has fallen in the streets. My wife, by the way, she's, don't mess with her. We once went down to, we were outside Parliament once, and they put all stuff over Winston Churchill's statue. Covered it, they had. And they put all these horrible things on it. And there's hundreds of people crowding around it, reading all this propaganda. So I see Mandy, and she never tells you what she's doing. She's quiet. But she walks over to this statue, and there's hundreds of people reading this stuff. She rips off this thing that they put about Winston Churchill, and in front of all of them, she doesn't look at any of them, she screws it up into a tiny little ball, walks over to the bin, throws it in, and all these people are like, oh, you can do that, can you? She's my hero. Let's have a look at 2 Thessalonians 2. 2 Thessalonians 2. They believe, Gen Zers, they believe that they are the limitless generation. They believe that. They're limitless. That's what they believe. They are limitless. There are no laws for them. Forget laws. Post-Christian. Postmodern. Your truth is your truth. We are the limitless generation. We are the lawless generation. 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 8. Then the lawless one will be revealed. Then the lawless one will be revealed. This limitless, boundless, borderless, lawless generation, the lawless one is waiting for them in the wings, and he wants to meet them. He wants to say, how do you do? You're into lawlessness, I hear. Let me introduce you to what lawlessness really looks like. And I've got some new tech that I'd like to put under your skin. You can try it out for me if you like. The Gen Zers, they say this, right? They say they are all about authenticity. And this is what they say. If you are not authentic, we will see right through you. They're going to be deceived by the Antichrist. You know that. You know that. They're going to be so taken in. Because they already love lawlessness. They're going to take to the lawless one like a duck to water. They are the first limitless post-Christian generation, all-inclusive, sexually liberated, and yet mental illness has gone through the roof. Suicide rate and self-harm has gone through the roof. You know why? Because the wages of sin is death. Yeah. So Tristan Harris made a fortune off the back of social media platforms, is now going around the world and warning people that this could lead to a very, very bad place. And if you watch that documentary, which was done way before this, you'll see that this starts to condition people to start to go to proactive rallies. This is way before this. This is one of the suggestions that it made. It's unbelievable. So this is what he said. If we do not agree on what truth is, or that there should be such a thing as truth, this is what he says, we are toast. We're fried. Now let me start to come to a conclusion here. Matthew chapter 7, verse 13. You all know this. Everybody knows this. Enter by the narrow gate. It's narrow. There's two gates. There's two ways. There's the path of the righteous, there's the path of the wicked. That's it. There's no in between. We understand that because we grew up in a Christian environment. Oh, Jesus, I have promised to serve thee to the end. We understand there's two paths. They don't. Mandy teaches Generation Alpha kids, Generation Alpha, these little kids. They're out of control, folks. Joseph Goebbels loved to give out free radios all the time. Free radios, so that they could brainwash people. Now they're giving out free iPads everywhere. Take an iPad. You've got kids bending iPads in classes, just smashing them like that. Because, you know, they've got everything. They don't recognize authority. These little kids don't recognize authority. Klaus Schwab said this, in the next 20 years, we will see the biggest changes of any generation in the history of man in the next 20 years. And I think that was 5 years ago. The fourth industrial revolution is coming, this is what he says, and man and machine will become one. He says in the fourth industrial revolution, quantum computing will become the bedrock. The bedrock. So I need to explain to you the difference between a classical computer, this is a classical computer, and a quantum computer, because that's probably what's going to come in. A classical computer, a smartphone, is a classical computer. And a classical computer calculates using transistors. And just as there are only two paths, the Bible talks about it, Jesus talks about it, he warns, there's two paths, there's a broad way, there's a narrow way. In classical computers, they calculate on transistors that can only be in one state or the other. The transistor is open or closed. Just like that door, it's either open or shut. They call this binary. Binary. It can only be in one of two states, 0 or 1. Okay? Classical computers are utterly predictable. It's what we've been used to all our lives. There's a heaven and there's a hell. There's two ways, two paths. There's Jesus, the Savior. There's the devil. There's two paths. There is no in between. There's no grey area. Classical computers are entirely predictable. On your average smartphone, try to get this. I know numbers these days don't mean a lot. On your average smartphone, there is 1 billion transistors. All of those 1 billion transistors are doing the same thing. Not one, yes, no, open, short. They can't do anything else. They're restricted to one thing or the other. So the more transistors you put on, the quicker you can calculate stuff. That's why there's 1 billion. So everything that you see on here, every face, every video, every game that you play, everything that you see is just 1 billion transistors going not one, open, short. And it happens so quickly that you get all this stuff coming up. But it's entirely predictable. Having said that, and people don't get this, that these chips take 6 weeks to make in the most sterile environments. These things that we have on our hands here are probably 20 odd years ago, they'd be priceless. What we have available to us today, we don't understand what we've got. However, quantum computers don't calculate with transistors. They calculate with electrons. And electrons are not like transistors. Transistors are very predictable. Open, shut, 0, 1, on, off, good, bad, righteous, wicked, so on. Electrons are just plain weird. An electron is 700 million times smaller than a transistor. There's 1 billion transistors on a smartphone, right? Quantum computers calculate not with transistors, with electrons. And an electron is 700 million times smaller than 1 transistor. Are you getting the picture? Well, that's only the beginning. Electrons don't follow the same laws or rules. On, off, left, right, open, shut. Electrons are in something that they call a superposition. They're in a superposition between 0 and 1. They could be 10% 0, 90% 1. They could be 50% 0, 50% 1. And anything in between, they're in a superposition. They can be what they want to be. But the minute an electron is measured, it collapses back to a 0 or a 1. As soon as it's measured, it collapses straight back to something predictable. So here's an example. Remember at school? Remember when you were at school where people actually were good in class? Yes. Remember those days? Yes. There was only one time that you weren't good in class, right? When the teacher turned around and started to draw on the board. And when the teacher turns around and he's not observing the class goes naughty. That's what electrons do. When electrons are not being observed, they are in a superposition. They can be anything or nothing or anything in between. The minute the school teacher turns around, all the class goes, da, 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 da. We never did anything wrong, honestly. Whenever electrons are measured and weighed, they collapse back into a predictable state. Edwin Schrödinger called this Schrödinger's cat. The thought experiment. Or if you really want to look into this, Google the double slit experiment. If I've lost you, don't worry, I'm going to get you back in a minute. But you need to understand this as an illustration, right? The Gen Zers, they're moving into a realm of new laws where anything goes. Where you don't have to be a 0 or a 1, an on or an off. You can be anything in between that you want to be. Let me show you very quickly. Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. You know probably what I'm going to say here already. Genesis 1, verse 27. And God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created them. What did he create them? Binary. Do you understand? Binary. Two paths, two ways, two definite sexes. That's why they call themselves non-binary. They call themselves non-binary because they identify as something between male and female. They see themselves as being in a superposition between male and female. And it can be anything that you want to be. You know all this. It can be anything that you want. And if you don't see what I am and what I identify as, then that's microaggression. I'm going to be very angry with you. I might even pierce my lip. However, God weighs. God observes. And in quantum computers, the minute an electron is observed, it collapses back to what it should be. God doesn't see people in a superposition between male and female. When he weighs, you collapse back either to male or female. That's it. In other words, the age itself, scientifically and technically, kind of shows us the mindset of where they're at. Okay, thank you, Lord, I got through that. I had nightmares about doing that part. Have a look at Joel chapter 3, verse 14. Multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision. Multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision. This is how God is. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He doesn't change, folks. He doesn't change. Well, I'm sorry, but I am a Christian, and I've noticed that my daughter is showing tendencies that she's kind of, non-binary. Well, I'm not even going to apologize. Look, God doesn't change. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. There are multitudes in the valley of decision. There are no grey areas. I've heard this said, that during the 10 days that lead up to Yom Kippur, Jacob can either verify this or not, but it's a good illustration. They say in Jewish tradition that there's 3 books. There's the book for the utterly righteous, there's a book for the utterly wicked, and there's a book in the middle for those that haven't made their mind up what they are. And during the 10 days that lead up to Yom Kippur, the idea is that you've got to get your name out of that middle book. There can't be one name left in that middle book. You are either utterly righteous or utterly wicked. You can't be in a superposition between the two. And we've had this for years. Well, I'm Church of England, me. Okay, that's good. I only actually believe in 45% of the Bible. Okay. The rest isn't true. Okay, that's what you say, isn't it? Yeah, I'm in a superposition between 45% is true, 55% is not true. Well, you're in the valley of decision then. And you've got to make your mind up. You've got to make your mind up. That's what Elijah was saying on the top of Carmel. That's exactly what he was saying. How long are you going to falter between two opinions? And folks, here we are. We've arrived here. Look, to say this is not scary would be not honest. These are scary days. They're scary days. And we've been called for such a time as this. And we cannot be in a superposition, folks. We just can't be. And the clarion call goes out from the top of Mount Carmel. If Jehovah is God, well, you worship him. If Baal is God, you worship him, but you cannot be in a superposition. Yeah. Okay, we're coming to a close this morning. Have a look at Revelation chapter 3, verse 14. To the angel, you know this, to the angel of the church of Laodicea, What does Laodicea mean? I'm sure everybody in here knows. What does it mean? People's opinions. Right, to the Amen, the faithful and true witness, which can be translated martyr, the beginning of the creation of God, says this: I know your deeds, that you are what? That you are neither hot nor cold. I could wish that you were one or the other, because there's only two states. But you're in a superposition between the two. You're lukewarm. And you cannot be. It doesn't exist. Do you understand? This is the spirit of the age. How have we arrived at this point? I said this at the beginning. How have we arrived at this point? When all this stuff has gone on, because the church has been in a superposition between hot and cold. And Jesus, by the way, even gives us the answer. He doesn't just say, I would prefer you to be one or the other. He says, by the way, I want you to be hot. The word zealous means boiling point. Be zealous, be hot. But we have taken it in that we can be innocent. You can't be. And this is the time that we're in right now, and we have to make our minds up. And these people, Jesus is saying, I'm using today's lingo here, because you identify as rich, you become wealthy and have need of nothing. You identify as that, don't you, Laodicea? But that's not what you are, because I've measured you. I've measured you. You're wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked. You think you're in a superposition. You could be a Laodicean and say, well, I identify as the remnant. Listen, the Antichrist identifies as the Messiah. Doesn't make him the Messiah. Laodicea is in a superposition. She's blind to a true condition. She has decentralized the gospel and made it irrelevant. She has been weighed in the balances and found wanting, and she will collapse before the throne of God into a wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked state. And the only hope for Laodicea is the advice of the wonderful counselor to buy gold refined in the fire. Okay. Revelation chapter 13, and we're going to finish here. I talked to you earlier on about critical mass and supercritical mass. The word tribulation means pressure. Oh, it can mean pressure. Tremendous pressure. Revelation 13 is not just pressure, tribulation. It's mega pressure. It's not just a bit of pressure to take a vaccine or socially distance or whatever. It is a phenomenal pressure. A great pressure, a massive, uniform, simultaneous, crushing pressure from every direction simultaneously. And because of this pressure, and because of the fire and the refining, and the one who observes the fire, everything collapses from superposition into one of two states. In the book of Revelation, there is no Revelation 13. There is no superposition. It's gone. It's gone because of the refiner and because of the fire. When you get to Revelation, nobody will be in a superposition. You won't be marching through the streets saying, I'm pro-Palestinian, I'm pro-Hamas, or I'm this, I identify as half cat, half person. You will go through the streets saying this, I worship Satan, or I worship Jesus. Nothing else will matter. That's the furnace of Revelation 13. The superposition collapses. Let me show you. And the dragon stood on the seashore. Then I saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns, 7 heads. And on his horns were the 10 diadems. In other words, he's crowned, he's ready. This is it. And he's got blasphemous names. The big thing of Revelation 13 is the blasphemy. That's important. We miss it. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth was like a lion. And we see this in Daniel chapter 7, but it's the opposite way around. And Jacob talked about this last night. He talked about this, he says, you know, who is the Antichrist going to be? Muslim? Is he going to be European? Is he going to be Jew? What's he going to be? And we see here that it's a kind of an amalgamation. And we don't know yet. The veil hasn't lifted. We can't really kind of say, but we understand this. This is what we understand. This is the thing. I saw one of his heads as though he'd been slain. The fatal wound was healed. And the whole earth was amazed and followed after the bit. Now look, this is it. And they worship the dragon. Do you understand? There's no superposition anymore. There is no politics anymore. There is no left or right anymore. It's all gone. It all collapses into one of two states. By the end of this furnace, by the end of the Great Tribulation, you will either be utterly righteous or utterly wicked. You will either worship Satan or you will worship Jesus. All superposition goes. And there was given to him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies and authority to act for 42 months, 3.5 years. And he opened his mouth in blasphemies against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, that is those who dwell in heaven. And it was given to him to make war with the saints. We see this in Daniel chapter 7. The saints are given over. When I heard the name of the conference, the Submerging Church, my spirit went into somersaults, because the church model is broken, folks. It's broken. It's never worked. It's gone. And we have to learn very quickly, and it has to be the Lord. He's got to show us what the church really looks like. Beryl, would you believe it? We were due to go to Israel. It would have been my first trip. And the war broke out. We were due to go meet up with friends. It just so happened that Beryl was going at the same time. I phoned you up, didn't I? I said, she's typical Beryl. She says, listen, she says, you don't need to see all those sights. She says, I want to show you the living stones. That's what she said. Oh, and when you said that, I got so excited. I thought, Lord, I want to see the living stones. I want to see the living stones. What are the living stones going to look like, folks? What's the submerging church going to look like? How are we going to be knit together? How's it going to work? It was given to him to make war with saints, to overcome them from every tribe, people, and tongue and nation. And all who dwell on the earth will do what? Their own thing? No. They're not going to do their own thing. They're slaves. Slaves, a lot of them. They're going to worship him. And everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who has been slain. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. People say, there's no mention of the church, the pre-trib thing. Hold on a minute. Jesus has just told 7 Gentile churches, if you have an ear, you need to hear. And right in the middle of Revelation chapter 13, he says, if you have an ear, you need to hear. And he says, I'm talking to the saints. Well, of course, they're not the saints. It's not the church. It can't be the church. It is the church. This is why he says, he who has an ear, let him hear. That's why he says it. If anyone is destined to go into captivity he goes. If anyone kills with the sword he must be killed. Here is, and I mentioned this last year at the conference, here is the perseverance, or the hupomone of the saints. Here is the staying power of the saints. This is the thing that binds us together. How we have arrived at this point? We've arrived at this point because for the past, goodness knows how many decades, the church has been in a superposition. They've not been one thing nor the other. But Jesus has a plan. It's his plan. It's not our plan. And he has really good counsel for the church of Laodicea. And he counsels them to get into the fire. Because when you get into that fire, all superposition collapses. And he says this, he who overcomes can sit with me on my throne. Praise God. I don't know about you. I find these days scary. But I'm also relieved. When I look at the map, when I look at this two-dimensional map, I can see we're on course. We're on the road. We're going up to Zion. Let me tell you, let me finish with this. In the same way that when we look at this two-dimensional map, and this two-dimensional map tries to describe to us what the glorified Christ looks like, and what the New Jerusalem looks like, and we see from this kind of two-dimensional map, when we actually get there and we see him in all his glory, friends, it will